Well, thank you, Colin. It's good to be here. I'm feeling very nervous, actually. I've not spoken in Parliament House before. I spoke at Oxford University a couple of weeks ago, but not in Parliament House, and not in front of so many of Wes's friends either. One thing I learned is Wes has lots of friends and a lot more than I do, so there you go. This is a picture of me. Obviously, I'm the guy on the left, but the guy on the right is Chief Umar. Chief Umar speaks a click language, and I've never come across a click language before. Chief Umar is the chief of the Hadzabe tribe, and I don't know whether you've heard of them. They're the last nomadic tribe in Tanzania, and he lives on the edge of the Serengeti with his tribe, and they are hunter-gatherer people. And we met him because I was visiting my brother Andrew, and my brother Andrew has been a missionary in Africa for about 25 years. He's the author of this book, A Doctor in Africa. He used to work for Catherine Hamlin. If you've ever heard of Hospital by the River and her work, he did a lot of work with her, but I'll talk about him a little later if you're interested. But I was there visiting Andrew, and we went hunting with Chief Umar and his men. And these are the guys, they're sitting around the campfire here. They're eating a dik-dik, which is a small deer that they caught the night before for breakfast. I had to sit down and have breakfast with them, very sheepishly and nervously. And when I got back to the campsite, I made sure I took some worming tablets so I could continue on the journey with my brother. We had a great time hunting with them. Here's the chief. We went out hunting with him. They hunt with bow and arrow. He'd caught this lovely pigeon for lunch. Gosh, we were going to be filled with food at the end of the day, having a delightful time with them. My brother was living at the time in a town called Arusha, which is right on the edge of the Serengeti. And while we were there, he took me to meet this lady, a friend of his. This is Gemma Seisler. I don't know whether you've heard of the School of St Jude, but Gemma is a person who came from New South Wales, Armidale, and when she finished school, she wasn't sure what to do with her life. So she went to Africa, fell in love with the people, and if you have been to Africa, it does get into your blood. It is a remarkable place. But she was taken by the plight of the poorest of poor children. They had no access to education. And so she came back with a vision and tried to sell it to the local Rotary Club in Armidale. She raised $10 back in 2000, and she took that money back to Africa and she opened a school. Her philosophy is to take one child who's very academically able from each family. And the reason behind that is then she can actually educate the whole family, because that one child will go back home and teach everybody else in the family to read, write and add up. All the children who go to that school are sponsored by Australian families, so they go there for free. I was there the day that the new class of year one, they start there, had just got their uniforms. They just admitted 150 new students. Here they are in their uniforms lining up. 5,000 students sit the scholarship exam each year, and 150 are chosen. That's all she can actually take. And these children, pretty excited, they were walking down the driveway to the gates, their gated communities in Africa, and the gates swung open, and outside the gates were all their mums, dads, their extended family, singing for joy because their child was now going to receive an education. It was a remarkable thing. Now, I talk about Chief Seisler and Chief Umar, and Gemma Seisler, because they're both leaders in their own communities. And all of us in this room are leaders in your business, in your homes, or whatever role you have in the community. My favourite definition of leadership is by Ken Blanchard, and he basically says that any time you are seeking to influence another person, you are actually carrying out the act of leadership. So by the very nature, if you have children or a spouse, you are acting in a role of leader almost every day because you're seeking to influence somebody else. And I think after being a leader in a position of leadership, and I've been a school principal now for 25 years, leadership comes down to just two things: vision and trust. Today I'll talk about trust, not so much vision. This is part of my story. I was the founding principal of Bergman Anglican School in the ACT, and I started that school in 1998 with 24 students. When I left in 2008, we had 1,000 students and 3,000 on the waiting list. and we were about to open a second campus. And I was appointed at St Paul's School, which is on the Bald Hills, North Brisbane. Now, when you see this picture, what do you see? So this is part of my story. When I was appointed to the lead St Paul's School, I knew it had historical sexual abuse cases that had occurred, but I had no idea of the extent of what actually happened in that school during the 1980s and 1990s. St Paul's School was case study number 34 at the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses into Child Sexual Abuse, and that hearing was in 2015. So I've been working on this since 2013 and still work on it today. This man was meant to be the most trusted person on the school campus. He was the person you went to when you were in trouble and you needed support, and you shared with him your innermost thoughts and feelings. And yet he abused over 120 students in his time at the school. Before that, he abused about 120 students at Brisbane Grammar School and probably equal number of students living on the streets. He's quite possibly Australia's worst pedophile. This week, 2 new victims have just come forward, and 1 victim wrote to me this morning. So that work continues to this day. The impact he had on the organisation was remarkable, not to mention the impact on those boys' lives and their families, and the ripple effect that occurred as a result of that. Now, I left Bergman Anglican School having established a school that was founded on my values and my beliefs, a Christian who values people. And I came to St Paul's School thinking that I would enjoy the same culture that I enjoyed at Bergman, that people would automatically trust me. I'm a nice guy, I'm a man of integrity, I'm trustworthy, I'm honest. But when I arrived at St Paul's School, I noticed that trust was missing. I naively thought that I would just be trusted by people, but it was missing. We don't notice trust until it is missing. It's like foul air. We don't appreciate the good things we have until they're gone. Now, this guy, Thomas Sergiovanni, he's an academic. He basically says that if you are going to take an organisation forward, achieve a strategic plan or a vision, you first have to build a culture of trust. If you don't do that, then there is no point. You won't achieve your goals. But what is trust and why is it important? Now, as John said, I speak around the country and I speak in different countries as well, and I normally do a 3-hour workshop to help people understand who they are better and understand the practices that build trust. And one of the things I ask people to do is to choose a picture card from a table, just quietly, that represents what trust means for them. I often choose a picture card that has a parachutist on it, because I went parachuting once. I've not been bungee jumping. Has anyone here been bungee jumping? A couple of people have been bungee jumping, you crazy people. If I had someone tie elastic around my ankles and then push me off a bridge, I would really struggle with that. I like to be in control. But I went parachuting once at a place down on the south of Sydney. It was a static line jump. Has anyone been static line jumping? One person. You can't do that anymore. I think it's too risky, unfortunately. But basically, you spend the day training. They put you into a plane after you've signed a waiver saying if you die, it's not their fault. And then they clip your ripcord onto the plane. And then when it's your turn, you shuffle to the door and the instructor says to the pilot, throttle off to slow the plane down. And then he says to you, when you're over the jump site, jump. Well, it came to my turn to go and I was absolutely petrified. No seats in the plane, door missing. Noise was deafening. I shuffled to the edge and I couldn't wait to get out of there. So as I sat on the edge of the plane there, the instructor turned around to speak to the pilot and I was out, gone. Now you're meant to count to 4 seconds, and if your parachute is not opened, then you're meant to pull the reserve chute. So you're meant to go 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, check parachute. And if it's not open, pull that ripcord. Well, couldn't be bothered with that either. They videoed it and my parachute streamed for 10 seconds, so I should have actually opened the reserve chute. Obviously I'm here today, so ended all right. But if I was to ask you to tell people around your table what trust is for you, you would hear that everyone would have a different story. Trust is a socially constructed phenomenon. It means different things for different people. It's a fascinating thing because you can't actually have an agreed definition. And that is because we all have our own life experiences. So if you have been through a terrible divorce, or you've been made redundant, or you've had your confidences breached by somebody, you will describe trust through the lens of that experience. And your experience is different to my experience. I would describe trust as care. You might describe it as something different. It's a socially constructed phenomenon. It only occurs when we come together in relationship with each other. And it's the same as leadership. If you Google leadership, there are over 30,000 definitions of leadership because it's also a socially constructed phenomenon. It only occurs when we come together in relationship. But if I was to ask you to describe what trust isn't, you would very quickly come up with these words because, as I said, it's something we take for granted, and yet it's the thing that makes relationships work. But if you've had your trust breached or broken, you would come up with these words very, very quickly. But the interesting thing about trust, even though we can't define it, there's been a lot of research around its benefits. These two people, Putman, social researcher, and Tashana Moran, have found that it improves the way people cooperate in the workplace. So if you've got a team of people working for you, it will actually improve the way they work together if you have a culture of trust in your business. It enhances the health of the organisation. It's a great place to come to work. We enjoy coming to work because we love being together and working together. We're trusted. Paul Zak is a neuroscientist and he has done a lot of work around trust, and you can look at some of his books, and he's looked at the neuroscience of trust and found that when you are willing to trust someone, what happens is you release in your brain a chemical called oxytocin, or the love drug. And essentially can get people to feel comfortable and safe in your presence by lowering your voice, your tone of voice, your body language, open body language, eye contact, shake of a hand, eye contact, all those sorts of things. It makes people feel safe. Oxytocin is released and they're willing to actually trust you. Testosterone, or the fight or flight drug, is the opposite. So if you're threatening or intimidating, then somebody's less likely to place their trust in you. But Paul Zak has found these sorts of figures, that organisations with high levels of trust have better productivity, 50% better productivity, less sick days, less burnout with staff. It has a real impact on your bottom line as a business owner. If you've got a team of people working for you, if you build a culture of trust, then your business is going to do better. Now, this guy, Daniel Goleman, said that the way you lead has a 70% influence on the culture of your organisation. So I really smile when I hear businesses that are employing head of people and culture positions. I think that's a real nonsense. I haven't actually looked at their PD to see what they actually do, because at the end of the day, it's actually the CEO who sets the culture of the business. And the CEO sets the culture of the business in the way that you behave, how you turn up each and every day, how you treat people. Now, I was really taken aback by what happened at St Paul's School, as you can imagine. It was a culture of mistrust. And if you don't know St Paul's School, we have 1,300 students across 125 acres, pre-prep to year 12, and we have an international school as well. And I have some 200 staff. I was walking 8 kilometres a day when I first arrived there. I still walk 8 kilometres a day visiting people. And I wanted to know, is this going to have an effect? Is it actually going to improve the culture? How is it going to benefit? Or is it a waste of my time? how could I be a better leader to change that culture? And so I asked this question: what are some of the things I can do that would improve and enhance the culture? Turn it around from a culture of mistrust to a culture of trust. And so I did a PhD through QUT back in 2012. And my PhD was done in two parts. The first part was to select 4 highly trusted transformational school leaders. And I'm an independent school head. Independent school heads are essentially a CEO of a large not-for-profit business. Our turnover is $35 million each year, plus capital on top of that. So it's a medium to large size not-for-profit business. And my role is as a CEO. So I was looking for 4 highly trusted transformational leaders in the independent school sector. And large schools, because trust is much easier to build in a small team. You've got more time to get to know people. I know everyone's name on my staff, but I don't know them personally. Very difficult to actually achieve that. So how can I build trust in that culture and not know them individually? Now, I used a theoretical framework called transformational leadership. Now, my view, as I said at the beginning, is that leadership is about 2 things: vision and trust. If you are not casting a compelling vision and transforming your organisation from where it is to where you would like it to be, and that might just be growth, then you're just managing what you have. Nothing wrong with management, but it's not leadership. Leadership is taking a group of people on a journey to achieve something remarkable. And you can't do it unless you build a culture of trust. You can measure transformational leadership, and interestingly, you can also measure trust. There are tools that academics have used numerous times, and they're reliable, and they actually measure those 2 things. So I use those tools with staff and schools across the country in New Zealand, and this is the data I received. 28 schools participated in the first part of my survey to select those 4 schools. 19 returned statistically reliable data, so these are the 19 schools. Any score above 0 meant that they were trusted. So nobody was not trusted. I was interested in these 4 leaders. What were they doing in their schools? Now, this data set tells some interesting stories. It tells us it's not a question of whether you are trustworthy or not. It's a question of how much you are trusted. So think of your child. You send them down to the corner store with a $5 note to buy some milk. You open your wallet, you only have a $50 note. Do you trust them enough to give them that or not? Or do you go yourself? It's a question of how much you are trusted. Now also, trust has got nothing to do with tenure. Person in spot number 1 had been in their school for 17 years. Person in number 19 had been in their school for 17 years. Person in number 17 had been in their school for 1 year. There was no correlation between trust and tenure from my research. Out of those 4 people, 2 were female, 2 were male. 2 were introverted, 2 were extroverted. It had nothing to do with character. It had everything to do with their leadership practice. Things that you and I can learn to do and get better at, regardless of who we are as a person. Trust in the organisation was measured with these 4 questions on a Likert-type scale, and I'm racing because I know I don't have a lot of time. These are the same data set, same 19 schools. I was interested in those 4 on the right-hand side, but what you can see is that there is a correlation between trust in the leader and the organisational trust. In fact, there was a 0.83 correlation. If you're into statistics or research, the higher the correlation, closer to number 1, then the stronger the correlation. So there was a very strong correlation between the way the person led and how everybody else interacted with each other. There was also a correlation of 0.92 between trust in the leader and their ability to transform the organisation. You can't take people on a journey, ask them to put in the extra effort, ask them to take risks, unless they trust you. When I went to visit my brother in Africa, my son and I went together, and we 33 hours to get there. We flew into Kenya to begin with, Nairobi, and then we were getting on a small plane at about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning to fly into Arusha. We'd got off a larger plane. We were in the airport for a while. We were exhausted. And then we got on a bus, and the bus driver drove around the airport for about half an hour looking for the plane. When they finally found the plane, it was a small plane, and we got on the back door, sat down. There was a handful of us in there, twin prop thing. And then the pilot walked in the back door and said, "Evening, everyone. Co-pilot's off sick today, so I'm going to try and fly this thing all by myself." I was too tired to even really care at that point in time. But if you don't trust your leader, you're not going to get on that plane, are you? Exactly what this guy said. Second part of my research is that I shadowed each head for a week and I interviewed the staff. I asked them to come and tell me, what does he or she do that engenders your trust in him or her? I don't want to hear words like integrity or honesty. I want to hear what they do. And they came and shared with me stories. They had no idea who I was, but they came and shared their stories. I then did a cross-case analysis between all four heads to find the commonalities. And I triangulated the data through surveys again. And I found 10 practices that were common between all four transformational leaders. Normally I would go through these very slowly, but I'm going to skip through them quickly to give you an introduction to them. And then if you'd like to, you can purchase my book afterwards, and then it gives you a detailed description of each of the practices, and it helps you reflect on your own leadership and develop your own skill. I wonder if you can imagine what they might be. Well, the first one is to admit your mistakes. Now, these aren't in any particular order. You don't have to admit your mistakes first. But remember back to the comment I made that trust is a socially constructed phenomenon. It means different things for different people. So the people you lead have different expectations of you. So for one person, this practice is going to be more important than one of the others. You need to work on all 10. Highly trusted transformational leaders are human. We make mistakes. And that's okay. It doesn't damage trust to admit when you've made a mistake. It actually builds it. Who would have thought? How many people in business or in politics try and cover up what they did? When if you just said sorry and then said, now I'm going to fix it, people are going, wow. Sure, there's verses in the scripture about that. Offer trust. Highly trusted leaders empower their employees to do their jobs. Anyone like to be micromanaged? You appoint people because they're good at what they do. Let them do what they do. Doesn't mean there's not accountability and coaching and mentoring, but nobody likes to be micromanaged. Listen. Wake up, everyone. I learnt through the Royal Commission the power of listening. At the Royal Commission, I had to give evidence, and I was there for the entire hearing. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I stood up and I gave an apology. I asked the Commissioner whether we could do that. And the lawyers said, no, don't do that. You can't admit culpability, et cetera, but we did. And that opened the floodgates. And from that day onwards, every single day, 7 days a week, for 3 months to Christmas Eve, 3 to 4 victims were contacting me and telling me their story every day, or their members of family, every day. It stopped on Christmas Eve, started again on New Year's Day. And as I said, 2 new victims came forward this week and another one emailed me this morning. That work goes on and on and on. But listening has a remarkable ability to heal people. Provide affirmation. Businesses that are good at actually thanking their staff or acknowledging the work they do, 12 times better returns. People are really keen to work for you if they know they're making a difference to your business. and what that difference actually is. Thank them and acknowledge them for that. Make consultative decisions. Nobody likes it when a decision's made about how they're going to work and they weren't involved in that decision. Because you can see straight away it's just not going to work, but nobody bothered to ask you why it's not going to work, and therefore we're living with a terrible decision. We could have made a much better one if we'd done it together. Be visible. Very difficult to build trust unless people can connect with you and see you and build that relationship. Hence, my walking around the campus 8 kilometres every day actually pays off. So it affirmed me, and I still walk 8 kilometres a day around the campus. Be consistent. Now, you can be consistently inconsistent, but what I mean here is that you have a cool, calm demeanour. Nothing flaps you. When somebody comes to you with a problem, they know what they're going to get. Somebody's going to listen and walk alongside them to solve the problem. Coach and mentor. Highly trusted leaders spend time developing the professional practice of their employees, supporting their career growth, investing in them. Yes, they'll probably leave, and yes, that means you probably have to find someone else, but once you're the leader, your job is to train the next generation of leaders. To give back. Care. I was really surprised. In a huge organisation, how can I care for everybody? And yet, time and time again, when I went into those schools, they would tell me stories about how their leader cared for people in their organisation. Not necessarily for them individually, but this is a person who really cares. Cares for people. And the last one was to keep confidences. I've learnt over the years when people trust you, they come and share with you things that you really probably didn't want to know, but they'll share it with you anyway. And I've learnt the knack from my wife mainly to ask the question, are you just sharing this with me because you need to tell someone, or are you sharing it with me because you want me to do something about it? Now from there, I developed a tool that you can use to share with your employees to measure how much they trust you against those 10 practices. You can find that tool on my website. It hasn't been used as widely in the corporate world yet, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but it has been used by educational leaders across the world, so there's a really good data set there that you can compare and contrast your practice against other people to see which area you need to grow and develop in. There is a charge for that tool. If you go onto our website, you can actually find that tool and use that tool. There is a small charge for that, but the benefit of it is it goes to supporting the children of these schools in the island of Santo in Vanuatu. St Paul's School supports 3 remote communities. These are the kindergarten children in their classrooms, and we send groups of students there on a mission trip each June, July holidays. Our first mission trip after 3 years went back last June, July holidays, and lives were transformed. But the money raised from that tool supports the education of those children. Now, I also had a goal of publishing my work in a book for mainstream leaders, and I did that in March 2020, and my goal was to actually publish it and have it in the business section of bookstores in the airport lounges. And there's a photo. That was March 2020. Somebody's worked it out. As soon as it went into the bookstores and the airport lounges, nobody flew planes. So I didn't do very well. But fortunately, a couple of weeks ago, the publishers wrote back to me and said, Paul, we've sold so many, we've gone to a reprint. So if you'd like to purchase that, I have copies there for $30. The profits for that go to a scholarship fund to support past students who would like to send their children to St Paul's School, past students who were abused. And this year we have our first full scholarship winner, or not winner, but young man who's come because his father has finally plucked up the courage to move back to Australia from Taiwan to send his son to St Paul's School. God does remarkable things. Now, as I said, I've also got my brother's book here today. My brother is my younger brother. He's got a really fascinating story. He published his book after mine, when everyone was flying it at the Opera House, and Princess Anne endorsed his book. So not that I'm jealous at all, but there's copies of that there for $35. And if you are interested, his work all supports the Barbara May Foundation, who's named for my grandmother, and we run hospitals throughout Tanzania and Africa, Ethiopia for women with fistula surgery. And this book I have here today too, this is my aunt Malika. She's been a nurse to the Afar people, 2.5 million people in the Afar Desert for about 35 years. So that tells her story as well. So if you do want a copy of those, you're more than welcome to have a copy of those. Thank you very much, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Browning, thank you. If I can just get you seated for a second. We'll just have a few minutes for Q&A, but God does do transformational and remarkable things. Yeah, be upstanding, that'd be great. Just wanted to thank you so much, Paul. You said in the beginning that leadership was about vision and trust. I like how you had Chief Umar. Did I do that right? That's really good. Thank you so much for sharing. Something I wrote, transformational leadership is about energizing people by providing them with a compelling vision for the future. And you've shared with us that trust is not about tenure, it's not about character, it's about transformational leadership, and the 10 things that you've just shared with us just then, which I won't repeat, but that was really marvelous. Thank you. I'm going to start off with just a couple of questions, so if you want to get your questions ready, we'll have Paul answer that in a minute. I guess my first question is, what did you learn? Was there any leadership or trust skills that you've learned from Chief Umar? What was his lesson?
Yeah, not so much from the chief. We did have a good time. We found some native honey that day, and we caught that pigeon, and then went home and had breakfast and lunch. So it was much better. But in terms of my research, I had been a leader for some time before I went to St Paul's School, but the PhD work really helped me understand what is most important about leadership, and it is about building relationships. It is about trust. And those practices I reflect on almost every day. What am I doing here that will actually enhance trust? What can I do to improve it with this person as I sit and listen to them and hear their story?
Thank you. And your quote, transformational leadership is about energizing people. So I guess one of my questions is, how do you energize your staff, your leadership team? What are some practices that you use to energize them?
Well, again, the same thing, these practices, but it's also about casting a compelling vision, something that's hopeful for the future. And that's been a real challenge over the last couple of years because of COVID, obviously. We're all in a place of fear. What's going to happen to our jobs? What's going to happen to the future? Will I be employable? Will I lose my house? Trying to speak hope into the lives of people, particularly if they don't have a faith, has been challenging. AI has caused the same sort of fear, and that's emergence this year too. So speaking into the void there where everyone's saying it's going to destroy humanity, end of days are almost here. Kind of exciting though. Be good to see Jesus come back again in our lifetime. But speaking hope into that, and you can speak hope into that by having a compelling vision that really excites people. And I say compelling vision because it's got to stick. It's got to be something that people really want to buy into. So our vision at St Paul's School has been to transform educational thinking and practice. It is now about transforming educational thinking and practice beyond the school gate, because we have done remarkable things, and we're about to launch our own not-for-profit business to sell the IP we've developed with schools across the world. So staff have been really excited to be part of that because they're making a difference.
Transforming educational thinking and practice. I love it. So that's St. Paul's vision. Yeah. Last question for me, do you have a personal vision? Is that important to have your personal vision? And how does that align to your organizational vision? And then I'll throw it to the group.
One of the best books I read was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I'm sure many people in the room have actually read. I took 3 months to read that, and I took 3 months sabbatical to go through it. And one of the things that it encouraged you to do at the end, I did that in 2006, was to create an individual purpose statement or a mission statement for you. So leadership begins with really understanding who you are, and not many people really know themselves very well. It is quite surprising, but what actually pushes your buttons? What do you really value? What are your fundamental beliefs? What do you believe about the future, and where's that going? Not many people know themselves. So this book encouraged me to do that. And I wrote a mission statement in 2006, and you can see it on my LinkedIn profile there, to be a worthy and obedient servant of God and make a positive difference to the communities in which I live and work. So I hope I have done that.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Browning. Questions from the floor, please. Michael Choi.
Thanks, Paul, for your excellent presentation. You mentioned quite a few times that tenure is not important, right? But we all understand that it takes time to build trust. It takes time to do the 10 things that you mentioned this morning. So can you tell us 3 practical things you can help us with to build that trust in the shortest time possible?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Circumstances will actually conspire against you. My research showed that there was no correlation between tenure and trust. And that was fascinating because we often think that trust is like a bank account and we can make deposits and build it up and then every now and again make a withdrawal by making a mistake. And that's not the case. It is all to do with how you turn up each day. So the best thing you can do is to turn up each day and reflect the love of Christ to people. Simple as that. Those 10 practices are leadership practices that you can learn to get better at, and that's what I wanted to identify. Things that people could learn to get better at regardless of who they are, Christian or not Christian, but obviously it's easier for Christians. The circumstances will conspire against you. Some people are really blessed to have a great workplace that has high levels of trust because the people of God before them have actually done that. It took 12 years to turn St Paul's School around. A big beast, but it has been turned around, so I thank God for that.
Thank you, Michael. 2 more questions. Phil Edwards.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That was wonderful. I just wonder, you talked about the Royal Commission and people coming to you and sharing what I imagine were some pretty harrowing stories. As a leader, when people are looking to you, what do you do personally to recharge and not get consumed by the problem?
Yeah, I made a huge mistake and I paid the price for it. So thank you for that question. I was listening to victims, and I still do, for 7, 8 years now. It's been a long time. And I foolishly didn't get a supervisor or go to counselling myself. I thought I was a good, strong bloke. God was working with me. No way did I want to repeat stories to my wife at home. I'd heard enough of them. It's horrific what has been told to me. Just horrific. So I've spent many, many dark nights in the depths of despair for people. But I didn't reach out, and I didn't reach out because I was stoic and stubborn, and my wife kept on saying to me, Paul, I can see it's changed you, you're suffering, you need to speak to someone. And only last year, or 2022, December 2022, it impacted my body all through that way, and I learned a lot about mental health and your body. Most illnesses are actually come from your mental health. 95% of illness actually comes from your mental health, which is quite remarkable. I had no idea about that. I had no idea about the emotional connection between your brain and your body. Ignorant, my wife knew all of that. And why didn't you tell me, darling? I did, you just didn't listen. I could feel the pain throughout my body, and then December 2022, it hit me with sleep, and I couldn't sleep. It was just awful. And at that time, I relented and actually sought out a counsellor, and I spent all of last year with a counsellor and on medication as well. I should have actually done that. So I would say good leaders need to have good supervisors and coaches as well to support them, because you can't do that work stoically on your own unless you have someone who cares for you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just over here.
You would have had a board, you'd have had legal counsel. How did you guide yourself in being able to, show wisdom through all of this and try and do the right thing?
That's a whole nother long, complex story, Alex. That will take many, many hours. But I am blessed to have a very, very strong council, and they have been incredibly supportive throughout that. That's probably all I'll say at the moment.
Maybe time for just one more question around Jeanette. Oh, sorry, you've got one more. Yes.
I'm interested in the journey you had through St Paul's. You've answered one question. It took 12 years. But what did you have to move out of the way to make space for the things that you've mentioned?
Wow. Well, there's 2 levels of it. There was the building of trust, and then also the reconstruction of the school. So the school was a very traditional school. For all intents and purposes, a great school on the outside looking in. But inside looking out, it wasn't a terrible school. It wasn't a great school. And we took our children there, and I was a bit disappointed we actually made that decision. But now I'm proud to say it's one of the best schools you will find in Australia, and has been recognised globally as well. We work with global leaders in the work that we actually do. So it's an incredible place, but I had to restructure that school. I had to make lots of people redundant, I had to create new positions, and building trust while I was doing that was difficult. In terms of the reputation of the school, the thing that turned it around ultimately was actually saying sorry for what had happened. And interestingly, I learnt that victims of abuse are not interested in compensation of money. They actually are interested in an apology and an acknowledgement of what happened to them, that they're believed and heard, because as children they weren't believed and heard, and so never told anyone because they felt so ashamed. And now that they're actually believed and heard, then they can move on their journey of healing. So one of the things we did after the Royal Commission, I didn't realise when I was at the hearing, one man from Brisbane Grammar came and embraced me and said, "Paul, thank you for what you just did, but I'm here representing those men who don't have a voice." And I didn't realise that many people have taken their own lives as a result. So I spent 2 years researching that and found 12 names of boys who'd committed suicide as a result of the abuse. And with victims and their families, we designed a memorial garden. And it's a huge structure, and we built that right in the heart of the school. So essentially we shone a light on what happened, and we put it right there, centre. And it's also a memorial garden that reflects who Jesus actually is. So it is quite a remarkable space. And I tell that story in my book as well. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Browning, another big round of applause. Thank you so much.